Welcome, everybody. I am humbled. I'm excited. I'm just trying to feel my feet on the ground right now. I'm with quite an amazing man here today. Um, and I just want to share a few things about Stephen here. Um, Stephen Jenkinson is a worker. He's a worker. He's worked his whole life. He's an author, storyteller, a cultural activist, and a founder of the Orphan Wisdom School, a teaching house for skills of deep living and making human culture that are mandatory in endangered and endangering times. He makes books, he tends farm, mends broken handles and fences, succumbs to people like me and has interviews and teaches and performs internationally. Stephen has captured my mind as a young therapist a long time ago, and I've always been moved by him. And in moments of stuckness, I would listen to him and I would walk and I would find a new meaning emerge in my being. There's a lot of similarities to me and Stephen, although Stephen doesn't know any of it. But one of the main things that stand out about Stephen's past is that he was an apprentice to a master storyteller when he was a young man, and he worked extensively with dying people and their families and he was a former program director in a major Canadian hospital, an assistant professor in a major Canadian college, medical school. And he's also a sculptor of traditional canoe building, where he's won the Governor's General Award for Architecture. So I could go on, but I want to talk to the place that has me here today, and that's this thing called dying. And when I was a young scallywag, I spent a long time with the dying. I worked in nursing homes, residential homes for the elderly, and I was 15, 16 years of age. And I did it for years, maybe 4 years, full time with school and chores. I would be there. I would sit with people who were dying, who didn't have families to come and visit them. And I would sit with families who had loved ones who were dying. And I noticed the similar things. I think that work, that shaping brought me into becoming a therapist that I am today. That keeps me being shaped. The curiosity of dying and what do we need to do to fully live so we can die well, and everything between birthing ourselves again and again and this dying process where when we die we help the ones who come after.
Oh, he froze. Yeah.
I'm back again. Okay.
There you go.
So Stephen, welcome. And thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
I have a list of wonderful questions from many of our group clients and viewers who messaged them to me early today and over the oncoming weeks. And one of our dear friends asked, Stephen, listening to you, I've gotten a sense of how open you are to be shaped by life and the people around you. What do you think supports us to be open to that shaping?
Well, first of all, it's a compliment intended, surely, this allegation that I'm open. But I'm not sure I'm open to the allegation, though, because I don't recognize myself in the characterization. You know, there's an old adage, careful with your open-mindedness, lest your brain fall out. Right? So I think that there's, regard for the fact that virtually all of life isn't you. That's helpful. Not only is not human, but is not you either. So that puts you in a distinct minority vis-a-vis creation. And that helps a lot, I think. I mean, this sounds ironic. I'm well aware. But I mean, as of yesterday or today, the Russians are invading Ukraine. So I'm feeling, gravitas again. I mean, how much gravitas can 1-2 year period bear is beyond reckoning now. I mean, I'm feeling that, and I'm going to try to faithfully enter the domain of personal concern and, sense of mortality and so on. But I'm doing so in a very particular time and place, as are everyone who's tuned in. And, I mean, an openness after 2 years of this pandemic, it's not clear that openness to life is recommended. Yeah. That there's, as the book says, to everything, there is a season. And it's, you have to be discerning about the notion of, let's call it openness bordering on vulnerability, bordering on endangerment, right? And I'm not saying that that's a continuum, but I'm saying without lucidity and a real alertness, then you'd be probably seduced into giving large portions of yourself away in the name of being inclusive. And then you end up as Groucho Marx said, end up belonging to a club that would reluctantly have you as a member, and it's not clear you'd want to be part of that club. So if I come to the spirit of the question that was asked, though, not to, be difficult, I think the notion that there's something about the person that needs defending, that's a questionable. I know I'm speaking against myself now, because this is, I mean, if I'm credited with openness, one of the things I'm open to is contradiction and confoundment, probably mystery at the end of the day. But it seems to me that the more we learn about the fundamental mysteries of life, the more mysterious they are, and the less on top of the hill we find ourselves to be. I mean, I've come to age to some kind of alertness during a time where the world is growing increasingly ambivalent about the humans in it, let's say. And then, over the last half dozen years, and then particularly over the last 2, I've come to a kind of agedness, I suppose, during a time when the moral high ground has been claimed by more squatters and sycophants and lords a leaping and everything in between than the gods normally permit. It's just the most mysterious and almost macabre time to be alive and to, let's say, to have your give a shit in working order, because there's a lot of temptation to be otherwise. There's a lot of temptation to just turn machines like this off. And I think that temptation should be surrendered to, routinely, for sure, because it's not clear to me that anything that comes through this machine anymore is worth the trouble. Myself included. I'll exempt you, but I'll certainly include myself in that regard. And so openness, well, it's the practice of amen, isn't it? If we use a good sort of Western, vaguely understood spiritual kind of term, the word amen is mistaken for approval of whatever the circumstances might be. When you say amen, you're the Greek chorus on the way it is. But this is not what amen means, functionally speaking. Amen is much closer to this. Look, I just have no idea. I used to think I did, and even I was wrong even then. And it's much clearer now that I have no idea. But for all of that, I'm kind of all in on my best days. That's what amen means to me. That's the function of it, you know? And if that's what the caller or the questioner means by openness, then I'm guilty of that. Yeah. So thank you for noticing.
Powerful, powerful. And well, I've got so many questions and I'm just trying to sit with what feels true right now in this moment.
Yeah.
This may be apt. If we were to explore together ways we refuse to die, I wonder if you might be willing to share an example from your own life where you found it difficult to let something or yourself die in some way, and how you navigated that process.
It wouldn't surprise you that I pay very careful attention to the wording in these questions. And the reason for that is because the language that we employ leads our thinking. It's not the other way around. So the first order of business is to get the record straight on this matter. And, let me see if I can spare everyone tuned in here the remarkable ordeal of attending to a lot of other people dying before one comes to one's own designated time. And say the following: the allegation that we let, permit, or otherwise acquiesce to dying, that we have a kind of permission to grant dying, is overreach in the extreme. Yeah. Let's go further. No doubt in your country, I should say, as in mine, people will very frequently wield the following velvet glove. You might have seen it in the film Grief Walker, actually, if you've watched that thing. There's a scene in there where a man whose wife is dying, he's a gruff kind of ex-military type, and he's on the camera, and he says, "So I just told her it was okay. I said, if you're waiting for my permission to die, I'm giving it to you." And I thought to myself, well, isn't that lordly? Now, you and I both know that this was intended to be compassionate and to release her from whatever bonds of matrimony and patrimony and all the other monies that claim people when they're together. I understand the motivation, but think about the posture. The posture is that you have this dispensation to grant, yeah, that you can permit someone to die. There's just no humility in the stance whatsoever. And the power that you imagine that you wield in a moment like that is breathtaking in its error, I think. So, would there be a better way to say it? No, there'd be a different way to say it entirely that doesn't swoon around the notion of personal agency the way so many, certainly North American types, are wont to do. And you could say something like this: dying is a god. If you begin there, you're unlikely to make terrible mistakes as you go. Mind, you have to translate like crazy, to turn that understanding into a sequence or a scheme of behaviors, that ultimately have some kind of ending that the witnesses can consider themselves lucky to have been in on. But if dying is a deity, a god, then the first order of business is to learn the god's ways, because you are, after all, a host to this visitor who now will not leave. As it turns out, the visitor has been in your front hall your whole life. You've stepped around him or her or them, as you've gone in and out of all your many schemes and plans and victories and defeats and so on. And you've used the god of your dying as a clothes horse, haven't you? When you're quickly changing gears and changing roles in life and draping it with your former self, and you understand the idea here, of course. So how to? It's not really a matter of befriending, I would strongly suggest, because befriending has a sense of peer relationship that I don't think is becoming. You know, your dying is bigger than you. So it's not a possession. It's a kind of trust. Yeah, that life has entrusted a certain bit of itself to you in the form of your respiration and anticipation and aspiration and all the rest. And your death is the way of life saying, well, you won't be needing that any longer. It's just getting in the way now. Yeah. And so, and I don't really think of it as paying back or any kind of indebtedness. I just imagine it that, you know, life comes into the world, life comes into life. It has to bow to incarnation. And we're one of the ways that it genuflects. This is a wonderful thought to think, isn't it? Yeah. And we are life, you know, bowing towards itself. And so I think that helps. I certainly hope it helps with the notion that this is yours to do with as you see fit. I mean, surely to God, how long should we measure it? 150 years or something in this order, where America sort of globalized the world in terms of personal agency and this is mine and, you know, all of that entitlement and all that stuff. And, you know, without arguing the point, could we say, okay, we've really tried that. We've really tried being the king, the cock of the walk, the king or queen or jack of all we survey. And we have the world that we have right now. So maybe this is learning enough to consider the possibility that something like humility, fundamental humility, minus any humiliation, could be a decent replacement for the entitlements that we have wielded over the last while.
Love that. That's powerful. Wow.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, I just feeling that one. And I'm just going to go completely in another direction because it just feels authentic. It may not sound great for the viewer here, but I'm just in this moment curious, deeply curious of that early period of accompaniment by an old storyteller, or that shaped you, or that impacted something. That, you know, I'm curious about that time, if it's okay to talk about it, to understand that process of having that figure in your life, and how impactful it was to you as a young man, and how it still maybe echoes. And as you speak to me, I'm meeting a way that you're speaking to me with a particular articulation, a particular type of feeling that's in, you know, there's lots going on in what you're saying, and I love your particular preciseness with the expression and the power of that, and how that is a part of how we're defined. And I'm just curious, how was it this storyteller teacher, the guy who started this process for you, or like where, like, I'm just curious about that wonderful cooking that happened back then.
Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking about that. Well, I mean, it's proper to say, apropos of the theme of humility, that we miss all our own beginnings, don't we?
Yeah.
It's like we're not there for them. I don't know how to explain that in logical terms, but intuitively, you know exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
No? So you look for your origins in vain. No, you're kind of brailing the situation out, even though there's proof positive that you did begin somehow, but you must have been drunk at the time, or whatever, you know, whatever it is. And there's no finding it again. Then there's just, instead, you adorn yourself with certain allegations that seem likely, right? And those amount to your beginnings, retroactively speaking. So, but then I think it's an indisputable fact that there are moments when the finger of God is up your nostril pulling. I think that's a fair assessment of necessity. And so I'm accepted to Harvard Divinity School, and I intend to go into the priesthood of something or other. See, I'd never been to church though, so this was an exercise in errancy for sure. I had my mind made up about what it was and what it was for, and how lucky they'd be to have me. And I was wrong on all counts, as it turned out, and never did get in. And occasionally now, well, in the old days when we would be able to congregate, I would be hired by groups of I was going to say missionaries. That's not right, but prayer communities and things of this kind. And I was fond of pointing out that they wouldn't have me years ago when they could have had me for free. No, I would have paid, and now they're paying me. So there is some justice in the circuitry. Anyway, so I'm at Harvard Divinity School, and I didn't have the marks to get there, but I'm there because I'm the beneficiary of some kind of foreign student quota arrangement, and I was a foreigner as a Canadian. And in literally the first 3 or 4 days I'm there, they have a meet the faculty event, and I'm intimidated beyond description. I mean, this is Harvard friggin' Divinity School, man, and there's all tweed and Harris tweed, of course, with the leather on the elbows. The look and what paneling and all the augustness, if that's an adjective, and so on. And so I walk in there. And you know how if you're in your early 20s and you're intimidated, you're generally not handling yourself well. You see, you're either overcompensating like a mad thing, or you disappear into the woodwork yourself, right? I forget which. As a Canadian, I was probably the second.
Yeah.
I'll leave the Americans to do the bombast, So, and somebody came to me and said, "You've got to come and meet this guy. He's, quote, unreal." Apparently this is an approving adjective. And so I went over, because this is often overused term, and I heard him before I saw him, partly by the tone of the gravel in his voice and the sense of utter at-homedness in his voice. That was I didn't know that's what it was, but I'm telling you now, with the benefit of hindsight, that's surely what it was. And I knew instantly, without knowing it, that I'd never heard that sound made by another human being. So already I was in the presence of something that had no precedent, and by definition was a little unnerving. And then I saw him, and he was a tall, thin, adamantly black guy. And he was giving forth without benefit of either permission or audience. And of course, it's an onslaught, that all of the sense of decorum, propriety. This is just the phone. It's going to stop ringing in a minute down in the other room. We forgot to unplug it. And, I could go on and on. There's a very detailed story, but the gist of it is that at one point he looked at me. Now, if you've ever been looked at by the real thing, the less than authentic parts of you don't survive. It's a kind of firestorm. It all happens in a second. And there's a lot of world literature stories about people on searches, right? And then they stumble into the presence of the person they were looking for without knowing it, and all the rest. And then there's something, they would say transfiguring. I would say disfiguring. It's much closer to the facts. You're undone, and you'll never be done again. If you're lucky, you'll never reconstitute yourself. So my time with him, it went from that, a very august but very unpromising encounter at the beginning, to him literally saying to me, I should be in his class. He was teaching the hortatory arts. Now, as an Irishman, you must know what the word hortatory means, because you guys are past practitioners of the art of exhortation, no? You've raised it to an art form. And he used to call himself Black Irish too, the man I'm telling you about. So he recognized the kinship, as do I. But anyway, exhortation is the verb to exhort is to plead or make an exuberant and vehement case for something, not so much legalistically as sort of morally, ethically, and spiritually.
Mhm.
And so the power of disfigurement there with an encounter like that is, once you've been radiated by what human beings are capable of, there's a standard that you will hold yourself to almost involuntarily from that moment forward, or you will perish in a realm of self-hatred that you could never bear. That's true. I mean, I'm making it sound like, biblical proportions, because that's what it was. It was an apprenticeship of an undeclared kind that was relentlessly destructive of most of my understandings what life was for and why I was here and all of that business. And it didn't replace it with anything of comparable girth or certainty or anything. And so for 7 or so years, I apprenticed him as a musician to his storytelling thing. And that's all he ever called himself, was a storyteller. And he certainly was that. But he was of the kind of human being that inadvertently establishes a kind of relentless, demanding, and frankly intolerant standard for stand and deliver in a time of real trouble that I've never seen really since. I certainly never seen before. And I'm not fit, to carry out his laundry in terms of whatever I've been able to achieve since then. And I'm not saying that in a self-abnegating way. I simply know what the real thing is. But I was radiated enough by his relentless example to have my marriage crash and burn subsequently, and then spend 10 years in the wilderness of not knowing how to live out what I'd been exposed to. And this sounds like desert stuff. It's that biblical, mythical desert encounter with something so adversarial and so without malice. It's an amazing combination. And I strongly recommend it if you've got nothing left to lose. If, on the other hand, you're holding on for dear life to certain aspects of your life that you desperately believe in, stay away from people like that.
Yeah, then the trouble really comes.
Truly.
Mm-hmm. The trouble worth having.
Very good. The trouble worth having.
Yeah, and you made me think about Joseph Campbell there as you were talking in the sort of hero's journey, and how the initiations and all the things that happen through that cooking process.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's devastating, man. I mean, we should not make it sound like it's a weekend in the country, It's I can't overstate to you how unnerving and disassembling an encounter like this properly is. And it's as old as whatever wisdom traditions humanity has been able to manage. That kind of encounter is that old. And the irony was, it happened in context, a divinity school, for God's sake, that the school itself could never begin to approach his example and never did. So there's the plan or anything of the kind. It was total. And the fact that as an old black man and his wife, that's typically how they traveled together, that they thought a rather skinny white guy from another country was worth the trouble. And then to be included in the life that they had managed, it's just, there's no calculus with which you can come to understand the nature of your fortune in a moment like that. So if I sound overwhelmed properly all these years later, I'm glad I do, because this was a man who was capable of a mastery of tragedy. Let me take a minute to linger over that phrase. That's what he was. He was a master of tragedy. Now, when we use the word master, we typically infer the idea that there's some kind of controlling or dominion aspect to the exercise. That's not what I mean. I mean, he was a master practitioner of tragedy. You mean he visited tragedy upon other people? No, not really. He incarnated tragedy. But tragedy, and perhaps we'll get to this as we go along here, but tragedy is the kind of business end of grief. It's the business arm, if you will, of grief, right? And grief is the capacity to be alive, right? It's the skillfulness brought to bear upon the excruciatingly challenging business of being a human being with a conscience, but without dominion. Yeah, those.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So with all of that, he was the funniest man I've ever been close to. I used to have to beg him to stop sometimes because, the guts can only handle so much belly laughter, no? And I mean, the endorphins, it was wild times, but it was hard. So can you imagine these kind of extremities and then undertaking the profanities of an ordinary day with this inflaming you at all times, when I was with him or when I wasn't, and the phone would ring and it'd be, there's a gig, let's go. And, we're performing, what was it? King Lear one day, or he called it Blues for Old. I mean, I could go on. Sorry. Clearly, I just want to make this an elegy to the guy who entrusted me a little corner of his understanding, and I've been able to carry it, I think. So he's a funny man. He's a tragic man. And, to be in his shadow for a while was to be remade. Yeah. In case it doesn't show, I miss him something terrible.
I can feel the fondness as you share about him. It's probably much more than fondness. I don't think maybe it's indebtedness, but I feel such a sense of, wow, like he was somebody who saw you, took interest in you, and journeyed with you, and that's massive. That's huge. I'm sitting here thinking as I've the different people I've met in my life, on unexpected, Sufis and dervishes of different sorts that would be abrupt and cutting to bring the tragedy forward in my blindedness that I couldn't see often and always. And but I find myself saying to the world, I'm ready for another one. And then I'm noticing the other voice, I'm right here, right now, it's happening. So there's I'm really enjoying this feeling I'm having as I'm sitting here, curious of what it is. Wanting to pause a lot, and then also noticing the pull to want to share and find out, go on this journey to understand more about grief and how essential grief is in being able to live in this life of this. You used a wonderful word in the opening, this sort of endangering times that we live in right now, and I imagine with this endangering times, how grief somehow has to become such and it's like gold. It's almost like it's like a commodity that's needed to help us get through these times. Can you tell us a little bit more about, especially now in this troubled, where horizons are not clear, and that's like being mild about it. The trouble, and I'll use the word again, the worthwhile trouble that's needed, and maybe some of that's grief. How do we navigate this turbulence?
Yeah. With all due respect, wrong question. Okay, because there's that mastery thing again. How do we navigate grief? Like if we get really good at it, what, we don't get wet?
Okay.
Is that if navigation is the order of the day, then is that what it looks like? That if we're really good at grief, we're not actually grieving at all? And I know that's not what you meant, but the language goes there anyway, involuntarily, no?
Yeah.
All right. So if we lay that burden down of thinking we know what we're talking about, and we begin to braille out loud towards the not yet. One way to do it is to give up on the idea that there's a thing called success that we have an obligation to, right? And that if we get, I mean, choose your adjective. If we get something vis-a-vis grief, then we get to have the grief light version of life. But that's not what it means. If you get good at grief, you're unbearable at parties, right? Nobody will invite you to parties, right? You'll be that guy in the corner by yourself. Oh God, it's impossible. So, okay. So one way to come at this is what I've called or christened the Orphan Wisdom Forensic Audit Method. It's a very august term for me going like this. So that's what I tended to do. I've tended to develop a kind of what I have instead of a strategy to come to something that is not giving itself away readily without hammering it over the head or pounding down the door, right? So one way you do it is to ask what it isn't. And at first that sounds like a nonsensical question, but you can build an understanding predicated upon crossing certain things off the list, certain likely candidates no longer laying a claim upon you. Like, what's the difference, for example, between grief and grievance? Because it would appear they're virtually the same word with a few more letters. Functionally speaking, something like synonyms or not. And I would say to you, not at all. Here's how it works. This is going to take me a minute to elaborate. We have the adjective apprehensive. We know what it means. We know how we use it, but we don't really know what makes up the word. I mean, the English language is a mystery to most of its practitioners, right? So apprehensive, the root word there, believe it or not, is the capacity to do this. To have an opposable digit that enables you to, that's the hen, H-E-N part, that's in prehensile, for example. I can't think of any others right now. Apprehend. So if you're apprehensive, you're not quite capable of closing the circuit that allows you to grasp something. No, this is a very useful capacity to be apprehensive, not to reach out and latch on to everything in the name of being certain. So grievance. So I'll finish the idea. So we have a hand, human hand, and we have this thing called a tool, which the human hand is allegedly designed to make use of, but it's the other way around. The nature of a tool is that we recognize the human hand in the tool. This is going somewhere, I promise you. Okay. So you could go further and say what a tool is. It's a word that we use when we need one. It's highly esteemed. But if you're called a tool, this is not the greatest compliment there is. So that's a strange shortfall there, no? Okay, but the human hand or the human being recognizes the hand in the tool. Screwdriver. It elaborates. If you've ever made the mistake of trying to turn a screw with your fingernail, that was a desperate miscalculation. But the screwdrivers furthers that work, and the hammer furthers the work of the fist, and the wrench furthers that. the work of you understand.
Yeah.
Okay. So the important aspect of this is that it's in the advent of tool making amongst humans that we saw both the nature of the hand and also its limits there. Okay. And if we were faithful to the spirit of the tool, we never employed the tool to exceed the fundamental limits of the hand. The limits of the hand were visited upon us in our encounter with tools routinely. We were glad for their appearance on the scene, but they exercised nothing like domain over the circumstances. Okay. And so we could envision being able to do more, but there was a limit to what we could do and to what we could envision. And that's how grief is visited upon you. There's a shortfall between what you can imagine, peace in our time, whatever formulation you'd like to grab off the top shelf, and the circumstances at hand. And you glimpse certain likelihoods, and some part of you will not survive the glimpse. And the amen quality to that is what I mean by grief. Okay? So limits, the capacity to imagine otherwise, the visitation of grief, they're related. Okay? And that perfect storm of attributes is what I would call cultured people. Cultured people are principally cultured according to their willingness to obey the limits that are entrusted to them. And the willingness to do so is where grief lives in cultured people. Okay, so let me give you an alternative that's very typical of where I live and perhaps where you live too. So we have this thing called a machine. It would seem to be simply an exponential tool if you don't think about it too much, but it's not. Here's why. With a machine, you have the very compelling ability to frustrate all the former limits. A machine is not an exponential tool. It's a different order of endeavor. Why? Because it doesn't extend the range of the human hand, a machine. It extends the range of the human will instead. And the human will brook no limit. And Exhibit A, they detonate for real. I don't know at which stage of development of the atomic bomb out in the desert in New Mexico. But who was it? Oppenheimer is credited with having looked out the window when the mushroom cloud was rising. And he quotes, of all things, the Bhagavad Gita. I think I've got the source right, in which he says something in the order of, I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. And that, my friend, is a machine. When human beings take the power of life and death into their own hands, it is a Frankenstein they become, not a Frankenstein they have made. Why? Because there's no limit to the willfulness that a human being's capable of, right? There's only defeat, but there's no limit, no self-imposed limit, no agreement to abide by a limit that we decide upon. So instead of the road sign being, be prepared to stop, which is still voluntary, it has already become, be prepared to be stopped. Okay. So what happens to a people, they're post-cultural when they're machine driven in this fashion and when they're the slaves to their own willfulness. What happens to limit then? Do you have grief regarding limit? You know you don't. You have no capacity for grief whatsoever. Grief is an insult in an arrangement like this. And so you have, you guessed it, grievance instead. And if there were ever a time that has lionized and deified grievance, you and I are in its midst as we speak now.
Wow.
Kind of a conversation killer, I know. But there it is.
It invokes something in me. Another probably possibly another bad worded question, but I'm going to give it a go anyway.
Please.
That's a very, very complete description of grief and grievance. I've never heard it put like that before, and it's still needing to settle in me,
Sure.
to be honest. But the support.
It took me a while to come up with it, man. So fair's fair.
so to support this time we're living in, can we call from the old? Like, I'm sitting here thinking of the old Irish wailers who used to wail at the coffin. You know, there was lots going on there. They just weren't just sitting there. There was a symbol, there was a ritual in it. There was some, and I don't know if they do that or did that in North America, or I'm curious about the rituals from the past that can support us in these times of great turbulence.
Very good. You're asking me about the keening.
Yes.
Surely. Okay. Well, I'm going to bring one of your countrymen to bear upon this arrangement now. Okay. So forgive me. I'm not going to quote myself for a change. I won't tell you who it is till after I've read it.
Okay. I'll give it a go, I guess.
Okay. Now check this out. Now this is in mid-flight. So this is in the second stanza of 3 stanzas. And I won't be trotting out the slouching towards Bethlehem to be born. I mean, that's had its goal, my God. At their inauguration, he says, public leaders must swear to uphold unwritten law and weep to atone for their presumption to hold office, and to affirm their faith that all life sprang from salt in tears, which the sky god wept after he dreamt that his solitude was endless. Come on now, it doesn't get better. There's just as good in this world, but there's nothing better. And the first time you hear it, you can't hear it, like life, no? Okay, so why am I bringing this forward now? This, by the way, is, there we are.
Mr. Healy.
Who else could it be? Bless his bones. So what is this? He's making 2 observations packed into 6 lines. One of them is about public leaders, people who hold office, no? Which is not a bad thing to think. At their inauguration, public leaders must swear to uphold unwritten law of all things. Why does he make that distinction? Unwritten law. My answer would be it's very similar to the difference between tool and machine. Written law requires no conscience whatsoever, not to fabricate it, nor to obey it. It only requires discernment about what constitutes obedience. That's all it's about, man, right? There's no conscience in written law. Unwritten law, on the other hand, is nothing but a conscience-driven enterprise, because the act of discernment and the act of translation are ongoing, and you're not resorting to the lawyers, because Shakespeare and Henry V, Fourth has had his way. No, you know the line I'm referring to here.
Yeah.
Okay. So and like, it can't get any better. Yes, it can. They're to weep, to atone for. They're to keen, frankly, to atone of all words. It's a beautiful word. To atone for their presumption to hold office. Not that they shouldn't. See, there's no prohibition. It's better. And this from a practicing Catholic, he did pretty well. He says, you must atone for your presumption to hold office and hold office nonetheless, having wept and atoned for the presumption to do so. God Almighty, that would fix a lot of things awful fast. But wait, he's drawing a parallel for what keening is for and how it comes to be by telling us a primordial story that in 3 short lines is absolutely breathtaking. And to affirm their faith, their being the people who are in elected office, their faith that all of life sprang from salt in tears. Wow. Okay. Just think about it for a second. You have the oceans vast, all of which are salt water. Where did it come from? How is it not potable, but at the same time, it's life-giving to the planet? How can it be? The salt in tears, he's suggesting, as a primordial vision of fundamental creativity. Salt in tears were wept by the sky god. Who's the sky god? Yahweh, my friend. That's who he's talking about. The sky god, the original sky god, is the one who still hasn't given up the ghost, the one and only. But look what he does with the one and onlyness. Does he critique and criticize and malign? And he's too good a poet. He doesn't need that. He's weeping on our behalf by putting these lines on a page. From the salt in tears which the sky god wept after he dreamt that his solitude was endless. Translation: when the one and only God dreamt that his one and onlyness was the only condition he'd ever be able to inhabit, he wept, and his weeping and his keening was made the life and the world as we know it. I mean, that's an understanding of grief that is an older person's understanding, that with all due respect to everybody involved, younger people are not capable of conjuring, of containing the impossible to resolvedness of that understanding. Yeah. So God bless him and God bless Ireland that we got that from him before he was done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just as you were speaking there was like 3 flocks of birds that dulled the room as you were sharing, Kim. In my vision, it was very interesting and quite symbolic. And as you were sharing, I was remembering the first times that I had witnessed the wailing as a young boy who was an altar boy at the time at a family blessing or something where I was, and there was wailing going on, and I was lighting the candles, and I didn't know I never lit a match before, and it was a clumsy, painful experience. But I was back there again, and it's such a, when you talk about, how, let's just look at it from some of our listeners hearing the depth, and maybe not getting the complete depth of what you were bringing forth, and the quote. In another way, grief, crying, wailing. And is this too big of a thing to say just in its ordinary sense? It takes you back to your origin, possibly. It helps you get in touch with yourself in some way. The grieving process, or that's not easy, that it's hard to grasp, it's moving. I had a question this morning from a woman, and she said, Nigel, if you have time, and she didn't speak that much, and I think it was wonderful that she got the question out, and it was like, why do we need to grieve?
Why?
She was troubled her whole life because she didn't, and she just wanted to know a little bit about why do we need to grieve? Is it not better just to all hold it in and be busy, or as they say in Ireland, to get on with it?
Get on with it. To be Protestant about the whole matter. Yeah.
Well said. Oh, God.
Not to add to the troubles now. I'm just. Yeah. Well, look, first of all, I mean, let's start with her blessedly unselfconscious question, right? Why do we need to grieve? Wait a second. Who said we need to? All the self-help guys say so. I know that, but I never said so. You never said so either. Okay. So, but you sound like you're advocating grief. Yeah, of course I am. But that's like advocating weather. What do you mean? Well, whether I advocate it or not, there it is. Okay, so it's not like I'm voting for it. I'm acknowledging it.
Yeah.
And I have gratitude for its presence on the scene. Am I recommending it as a kind of daily bromide for the, the ordinary slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? And the answer is nope. Well, why not? You remember what I told you about Brother Blue, how hard that was. Okay, so don't recommend a regime of spiritual practice to people that you don't intend to live out the consequences with them as their neighbor. Okay, so you won't get anything from me by way of prescription. I never said we need to grieve. But if you're asking me what's the difference between grief and grievance, I can say something. If you're asking me what I think the consequences of the sound, let's come to this now. The sound, you see, that's the thing. Yes, I know for the person who's making the sound, there's a kind of holy machinery that's employed to get there, right? And you can't get there from a standing start. You got to, it's almost choreographical, isn't it? Or symphonic in some way, that there has to be a kind of beginning that nobody notices, no? And the best keeners didn't even know the person who died. The timing is not required, you see, because it has nothing to do with personal biography. It's something else, which is what? Very likely, if the world was birthed, then there were birth pangs associated with it. And if that's true, then there was some kind of birth keening that attended to the very beginning of every enduring thing in this world. So it's a very old sound there. 2, at any given moment, it behooves us to recognize that not everybody who's in on a sad moment can hit that place. So then you realize keening is not psychotherapeutic. It's not cathartic in terms of personal resolvedness, or God help us. What's that term I can never use? I'm so proud that I can't think this kind of shit anymore. When you talk about, isn't that awful? Okay, it'll come to me. I'm sorry. The synonym, it's a synonym for completion and putting an end to, the unfortunate parts of your life. Not getting on with it is one. What? Resolution? Not resolution. The self-help gurus love this word, and this is why I can't think of it. Closure. Thank you. That's the word I'm thinking of. Like you should be able to achieve closure on endings. What? You should be able to end the end, is it? The great grief bypass, is it? Come on now. You're dealing with a pro here, okay? Okay, so what am I saying? I'm saying that fundamentally, keeners are performing an immensely important public service, masquerading as personal sorrow. Because the best of them, it's not personal. For the best of them, it is a kind of anointing. Not unlike people who can really sing. Yeah. Not everybody can really sing. And there's something about hearing the sound that so ennobles you that it's no longer an inability to sing, that this inability has become the unoccupied place in you that is now occupied by the person who can make that sound on your behalf. So it's a wondrous thing. And you know it. I mean, even Protestants know it, myself included. We know that if you're in the presence of the real thing, sooner or later that shit's contagious. And if it isn't, and you're so well defended against it, your defenses themselves will be revealed in a way very involuntary for you. So any which way it goes, even if you can't get there that day at that memorial service or whatever it is, there's some part of you that will mourn involuntarily that you couldn't. And you may shame and disgrace those who can, to compensate for your inability to do it. But some part of you knows that you're lying to yourself, that if you had your druthers, you'd rather be able to make the sound. But the beauty in this world is not everybody has to be able to do the same stuff at the same time. So the keeners, hold on to them, They may go crazy from time to time, go off the edge of the known world from time to time, and you may have to talk them back, and you may have to participate in their care and feeding because they're helping you out and it messes with their day.
And these are not exactly keeners, but what I find as I suppose a group analyst, it's like a dynamic sort of group therapy that I do as one of my passions of bringing people together. And something I've noticed over the years is when people get to that place of mourning, like really deep mourning, doesn't matter how rigid some of the people are in the group who are, as you use the words, heavily defended. There's something, if they're exposed to that again and again, something happens.
Yeah.
But something happens that they're there in the first place.
Yeah.
That's maybe out of their awareness that, that they're presenting defended, but there's a part of them seeking something that they don't know what it is. It's almost like boredom, almost. It's like looking for something to happen, but you don't know what it is. But there's something happening that it doesn't matter over time. They get, I don't want to use the word melting because I don't want it to sound, I don't want it to sound like, it's an easy thing. It's a nice threshold to cross over, because it's not when they get in touch with it. When they really get in touch with it, it's not sobbing. It's touches of lacrimony and it's deep grief that comes in. And so I love how you said it again, the sort of atonement or like a sort of like how the old keeners it's almost like they're touching something with the sound in each of us that gives us permission, or it helps a movement. It helps us have that movement towards a possibility. But I love that shaping, how you put that. And is that something that's still going? Is that because I always traveled a lot? Like, do you see that still happening in Canada and in North America?
I have to say, North America, nobody came to North America from the old countries to carry on the old country ways. As trite as that may sound to you, there was so much lost in the Middle Passage, across the North Atlantic. There was so much thrown overboard, psychically and culturally. And the notion that there could be any cultural continuity is it's an accident, really, because that's what people were trying not to be, right? And the trauma that's consequential to all of these losses is what America is. Look, America, I don't mean the country, the United States of, I mean the notion called America, everything that it conjures. Not just the allegations of freedom and all that, but the whole crazy, sorrowing tapestry. All of that stuff is a European fantasy. There are no American fantasies. Okay, the American dream is a European dream. That's what America is. It's what Europe thought it was capable of, is when it stopped being European. See, but it was a vacuum, and the vacuum was filled by, let's call it, the least desirable aspects of what people were trying to leave behind. So then, if I come to the in a narrow sense, that your question, of course there are people who can do it. It erupts in every generation. I used to have a singer travel with my band, and she was reddish and moon-faced, like yours, right? And it was clear ancestrally where she was from. But she opened her mouth. There was nothing to her physically, but she opened her mouth, and it was terrifying at some level. And she studied Georgian polyphonic singing in Georgia. And the highest compliment she received is at one point, some of the old men looked at her and said, "You sing like a man." So these things, how to explain them? No.
Yeah.
How did it get there? And the answer is, well, it doesn't obey the most obvious genetic DNA transmission, right? These things tend to appear to a certain degree, I think, when the needfulness, the critical mass of needfulness makes a place for them. It's not always in the place that we would prefer it to appear, but these things they're signs of life, and they will, like water does, they will find their insinuation under pressure. They'll move sideways. And that lateral motion, that's what our history is, not our forward motion. But
yeah. And also, it sounds hopeful, even as you talk about that it can penetrate. And as we come to the end of our journey today, and I'm thinking, am I being presumptuous with wanting us to end hopefully? And some of my teachers would say hopefulness is a premeditated disappointments. But I'm trying to think with what is there other than and with what you've shared today, a few words for the listeners on the space or I don't want to say steps. Yeah. Let me start again.
okay.
For the people listening, what would be important to share right now in relation to one thing that feels important, like a totem in the storm of our times?
Well, first of all, I think we've done that for an hour. So it's not like we're saving the best for last. So you could have ignored us for the last 15 minutes, but just tune in now. I mean, that's terrible programming, right? I'm not saying that people don't do it all the time. I'm just saying I don't. Mm-hmm. I answer or respond to everything you've said as if they're just about to pull the plug on us, as if the wind will get up in the wires and detonate the whole operation, and you're just left with and mid-flight kind of thing. No? Okay, so that's how seriously I take this privilege. So I'm not saving the best for last. And properly, if you could really accurately and authentically sum up something so that people could carry it in their hip flask, then what's all the rest of the time for? Are we just yammering and then all of a sudden we're hitting no, come on now. I'm not, at least. Okay. So now that I've made a shambles of the question, I'm sorry, but I could say this instead. I was apprised of a medieval Provençal prayer some years ago, long time ago. And the only reason I remember it is because it's short. And it goes like this. God, help me. My boat is so small, your sea so immense. That will do. It's all there. Now you got some work to find it all, but it's all there. Why? Because if you could call it a prayer, but we usually mistake prayers for gimme, I ain't got, that's the mobilizing circumstance of a prayer. But that's not in there really. Just a kind of a willingness to fess up to the facts that the thing is clearly overwhelming. And I would settle for whelming if I could, because that's what grief is. Grief is whelmed, right? Stopping short of overwhelmed. Grievance is overwhelmed, but grief is whelmed. So, God help me. My boat is so small. Is that true? But we're all over the friggin' world. We've mauled the whole operation with all our effects and side effects. And yeah, I know. I know, but when push comes to shove, my friend, the boat is small. How can you tell? Well, because the waves seem particularly unkind to it. Yeah. So you're not a super tanker. You're in a little bark. You know the word, QUE at the end. You're in this little bark, and that's your allotment. That's what you're entrusted with. You could call it your body. You could call it your time in. You could call it the range and scheme of what you've been exposed to, what you were lucky enough to see, and what perpetrated a gross misfortune upon your eyes, everything in between. My boat is so small, your sea so immense. This is not a problem to solve. You will not fix that. Okay, that acknowledgement is not saying, and I'm nothing, I'm nobody, I'm less than nobody. It's not what it says. It simply says, the immensity of the sea articulates the smallness of my boat. And it turns out that a boat of that size, somehow I'm capable of navigating. If it were any bigger, I'd be undone in the immensity of the sea. But it's small enough not to take every misfortune on at once. Yeah? P.S. to the people who are listening, I never said you have any obligation to be hopeful. Okay? It has nothing to do with the pandemic. I'm saying hopeful people don't do well. I know that sounds like apostasy in a modern age, but I promise you this, I was at enough deathbeds to see what being hopeful did to people who had no right to wish themselves away from the time that they were in. Oh, that sounds very strong language. What do you mean? I mean, they were dying. Okay. And I was there lots of them. I've got no reason to misrepresent what I'm saying to you now or exaggerate it. I'm saying that most of them died badly because they were trying not to die while they were dying. And that was construed as being hopeful or positive. That's what it was. That's what it did to them. They were no longer able to inhabit and fully occupy that little boat of their lives as it headed out into the whale road. Yeah. They couldn't, because hopefulness forbade that of them. Hopeful people are not allowed to die, you see. It's a terrible tyranny, no. You're obliged to die when you're dying, as any living human being should properly understand. And the consequences of you dying well accrue to the people you leave behind who you claim to love. Well, the consequences of dying badly accrue to those self-same beloveds. Please proceed accordingly and reconsider this allegation that being hopeful is tantamount to doing well and being on the right-hand side of history or the Father. I think it's neither. I think it's an abrogation of fundamental responsibility of the existential kind, that you want to be a citizen of an allegedly free country, then you inhabit the troubles of your times. You don't wish them away, claiming that you're doing somebody a good turn by refusing to know. I'll put it another way, by refusing to acknowledge that your birthright includes having been born to a troubled time. I know that confounds the notion of birthright. But surely your appearance here among us in a time like this is not an accident. And surely the obligation we all have is to translate what it means to be born into a time of distinct compromise and promise. Because if you can imagine 2 or 3 or 4 generations from now, what will they need from us more than any single thing? That we were hopeful? I doubt it very much. I think they'll need to know what duly engaged citizens gave themselves to in a time that held so little promise.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you too, sir. And listen, PPS, we're putting together school sessions now for the first time in 3 years. We're reassembling the band. We've begun to rehearse for getting out on the Nights of Grief and Mystery tour. And by God, if there is a God in this world who's not weeping his brains out for his onlyness, that means surely to God we should be able to perform in Ireland. And if we do, I would assume you'd be there.
Do you think it's going to happen this year?
Yes, sir. I do.
Oh, right. Okay.
I
So
do. I'm not hopeful about it at all, but I'm fairly sure it's going to happen.
Okay. What else is happening in your world that you would like our viewers to know about?
Oh man, I don't know. Well, I finished a book during a time I wasn't supposed to be doing anything. So the opportunity to take it easy was lost on me. So there's a book in the offing now, very close to finished. And we're reviving the school, which we're doing. The fourth session of the European school is in Wales in beginning of June. And we've just formally acknowledged that we're happening. And you can only imagine the circumstances necessary to reassure people that you're going to take every step to and their safety and all. I mean, it's frankly, it borders on the undoable. But undoable things have been particularly compelling to me over the years. So we're doing it. And we're going to do the school here, the graduate school on the farm here in August. We're going to do a new session of the Orphan Wisdom School, never met before, from the beginning. And I should tell you, without letting in on too much, that the first text of the first meeting of the Orphan Wisdom School, wherein all the themes that we will address during the course of 4 years are to be found, is in a novel treatment of the famine.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an amazing, written by a Canadian. It's just an astounding book called The Law of Dreams.
The Law of Dreams.
Dreams, yes, I'd recommend it to you. And this is the overture for the school, actually, and all its preoccupations. And so we're going to do that. And then, as I said, in the fall, we're going to try to mount the Nights of Grief and Mystery entourage again and see if we can get out on the road. And when the pandemic came, I had a 70-city tour on 4 continents lined up for this enterprise. We were going to Istanbul and Stockholm and Tel Aviv, and it was going to be unbelievable. And not one of those shows happened for the reasons that all of us know. I don't think we're going to be able to reconstitute at the same scale, but certainly this fall, we're going to try to get out on the road in North America, and perhaps in the late spring, early summer, the doors will be open in certain places in Europe, UK probably in particular. And we're meaning to go. That's as close as I can get to yes, but that's pretty close. So we'll see you down the road then.
We'll be I'll meet you for a cup of tea or a halfin, whatever comes first.
From your mouth to God's ear, man.
Thank you. And again, for anybody else who got moved, impacted by today's share, please check the links below to get any and all of Stephen's links to his work and his wisdom. And if anybody again got moved or liked what was unfolding on this journey today, please hit a like, share, or please comment. It helps us reach more people and share the message. And again, thank you, Stephen, for taking time out of your life to be here with us and ours. It's a real honor. Thank you. Enjoy your day, as you have given so much to me, and I'm sure to the viewers as well. Thank you, sir.
Cheers. It's an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next time.
Next time. See you.
Okay.
Everybody. Blessings. See you next week at the same time. Thank you now.